think we'll get started. So good afternoon. My name is Tracy McCormick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Retail Energy Supply Association. RESA is an association that advocates for retail choice throughout the United States. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Dan Allegretti, who is RESA's national spokesperson and will be the moderator today. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And thank you to everyone who has joined us and is participating today in the RESA Arizona webinar. We're pretty excited. I would be remiss if I did not, however, begin by offering just a word or two about RESA. RESA is the Retail Energy Supply Association, and we're the National Trade Association for competitive electric and natural gas suppliers doing business in all of the jurisdictions across the U.S. That have opened their markets to retail competition for these commodities. We are both an advocacy arm, but also an information resource. And I have to make a plug for our website, which is full of information. There's a lot of great statistical data there. There's a lot of great policy information contained, and that is www.resausa.org. That's resausa.org. Encourage all of you, if you have questions or just are interested in the topic after today's webinar, to take the time and come visit our website. There's been a lot of discussion about retail competition, about electric competition, and it's not without some controversy. There are, in my view, a lot of myths and misconceptions out there. And it's really our hope today to bring some information to help cut through some of those myths and misconceptions. We understand that Arizona is at the beginning of a conversation about retail electric competition, and it's our hope to add to that conversation and to bring our perspective as an organization and to bring in some outside expertise to help people move through that conversation and gain a better understanding of retail electric competition. Arizona is not alone. Other jurisdictions have had a lot of experience with it, made a lot of progress. We're going to bring some of that information today. But we also thought it was important as we move into this webinar to really bring someone who could offer a perspective on the question, well, what does retail competition have to offer Arizona? And for that, we felt that it was really important to have an Arizonan to begin our conversation today and kick things off. And our group just couldn't think of anyone more appropriate than Vicki Sandler. Vicki has a wealth of experience in the electric industry in the state of Arizona. She has seen it from the perspective of the regulator, from the ACC. She's seen it from an industry perspective, from that of a competitive supplier. She's seen it at both the wholesale level as well as the retail level. She brings a wealth of experience, and it is just a terrific opportunity that we were able to bring her here today and have her share with you her perspective on what retail competition could bring to Arizona. She's someone I've known for a long time, and I'm just delighted that she's here with us. And with that, I'm going to ask Vicki to go ahead and present.
Thank you, Dan and RESA. Imagine life without your cell phone. Sounds peaceful, right? I don't know about you, but in my case, my cell phone is my most valuable material possession because it contains all the pictures of my loved ones, the adventures we've been on, the contacts of people that matter to me. It is my virtual assistant, and it stores the creative works that I value. Now, what if the telecom industry had stayed a monopoly and we had our old black rotary phones? Would we be where we are today with a computer held in our fingertips? The monopoly model was set up over 100 years ago to establish one set of wires to more efficiently distribute the power and to acquire enough capital to build necessary generation to meet our power and energy needs. While the distribution of wires monopoly may still have a good reason to continue, the generation monopoly has long since worn out its usefulness. It is stifling innovation and choice at an unacceptable cost to us all. Airlines, gas production, and transportation have all been deregulated because the barriers to entry no longer exist. Innovation now abounds. When past decisions to build generation that are now way above market cost are considered in rate cases. In a monopoly model, utilities seek full cost recovery. Now, this was designed to ensure the health of the monopoly. However, this does not create an environment that leads to accountability, innovation, and risk-taking. Really, would you take a risk if there were no reward for it and you are getting a generous, essentially guaranteed rate of return on equity and complete cost collection? Now, don't mistake me in that Arizona Public Service Company and the other regulated utilities have great, smart folks whom I respect greatly. It's just that the model is broken. So why do the monopolies, when faced with a future of regulated competition, act like Chicken Little and proclaim the sky is falling when an acorn only fell on his head? Paralyzing fear is promoted among our policymakers by those self-interested in maintaining a monopoly, not in the facts. Yet we have 20 years of best practices to draw from to apply the very best ones that fit Arizona. In my experience, the benefits far outweigh the risks that are manageable with thoughtful regulatory guardrails. You see, I've lived in both the regulated and competitive worlds as former FERC and ACC legal counsel for APS, and as the president of the competitive affiliate APS Energy Services. I even wrote an award-winning book describing the different cultures and types of people that thrive in each world. In the monopoly, for example, a customer like a data center would push the utility to do a special contract. Often I wrote those for the utility. And that gave them just enough renewable power to get them to back off. The data center did not get what they chose, which often was 100% green power with backup that they wanted to own. You see, in regulated competitive markets, the customer can build its own renewable resource and wheel it to its facility. It can buy or build what it chooses and determine the reliability that it needs. The customer has a choice to get what it wants when it wants it. Now, as president of APS Energy Services with my team, we had exhilarating experience to provide customers with green and other energy solutions of their choice in California, Texas, and in Arizona in the early 2000s, and APS ES performed over a decade until it was sold. We built district cooling plants, solar, methane recapture, biomass. We offered interruptibility discounts and energy efficiency performance contracts. Our focus was to help our customers use less and use greener energy. All solutions demand supply side to reduce our customers' usage, and bills were explored, and we provided them with what they chose. That's because we were not incented to get a rate of return on capital and focus just on the supply side. These customers proved perfectly capable to choose their energy supply, just like they do with the other purchases for their homes and businesses. When APS Energy Services won the right to serve the University of California, California State University system, initially at over 200 megawatts and 33 campuses, they desired 20% green energy in 2000, and we provided it for them. Another example is Arizona State University that decided to diversify their portfolio, and we built a cogeneration plant right across the street from my old ASU law school. We also aggregated the City of Phoenix municipal meters for over 80 megawatts, and they joined our curtailment interruptibility program. Now that saved the city thousands of dollars a month without jeopardizing their operations. And we helped hotels by putting in occupancy sensors so that when people left the room, the lights went off and the heating and cooling went off. And that paid back for the capital involved in buying the occupancy sensors in 3 months. You're going to hear of the many choices offered by premier competitive energy providers from our speakers today. Now, here's just one example from the Pennsylvania website for choice. I will pull it up here and share my screen with you. So you can see in the Pennsylvania competitive market, here's a sample of one of the many offers. This happens to be IGS. You could select a green electrical product, a carbon neutral product, even a home warranty if you wanted. An interesting look, you can see what customers are saying, and you can then make a confident choice to choose a reliable provider. Now in Arizona, the cities and its citizens have been polled and they clamor for more renewable energy. As noted in the recent filing by Green Mountain Energy to compete to serve 100% renewables, which by the way, no regulated utility has a similar offer. Arizona will attract even more data centers and employers who have pledged to be 100% net zero carbon by 2030, like Microsoft, if we go to competitive retail choice. This will create jobs in our state as the independent power producers build more green plants, rather than having the jobs, plants, and taxes all go to other states with more friendly policies for regulated competition and choice. I mean, think of your own experiences with companies that don't serve you. You switch, you rate them poorly on Yelp. You have the right to choose a provider that matches your needs and values. With a regulated monopoly, there are very few avenues the commission has for dealing with complaints, and it cannot realistically decertify them without alternative providers. Regulated competition, in contrast, disciplines the company's cost structure and promotes investments in customer service to retain customers who have the ability to switch. Now, the commission's focus, once the law on the Arizona books for regulated competition, that is retail choice, is implemented, will change to focus more on consumer protection. But the commission can be very effective in ensuring no slamming and handling complaints about competitive providers, including decertification when appropriate. There is a consumer bill of rights among other protections that exist in the commission rules, and there are even more best practices that could be included. 2 strikes and you're out. That could be the world of the future. But today we have an endless, costly rate case process that rarely results in giving the customer what he or she wants. Among the many fears being hyped is that people will pay high prices like in Texas. Our commission can legally set a range of rates in which competitors operate. There will be a reasonable cap, unlike Texas. This band of rates follows in the wake of the competitive telecom industry in Arizona. And yes, prices in competitive states increase at a lower pace than in monopoly states. Let me share this with you. Now, what you're looking at here is all sector prices, and you can see the black lines, the increases from 2008 to 2020. The majority of those increases are in the monopoly states. Now, the green lines on the other part of the graph represent the competitive jurisdictions, the 14 jurisdictions that are competitive, and they cluster in the lower range. In fact, 50% of them have had rate decreases. I'm going to show you another view of this here. And this is a bar graph. Let me show you here. Share screen. Right here. Okay. This is a bar graph. It's the nominal weighted average percentage price change by consumer class from 2008 to 2020. As you can see in the 14 competitive states, overall in that time period, there's been a 7.4% price reduction. Residential has had a modest increase, and commercial and industrial have saved a lot of money. And the monopoly states, the 35, you could see overall, over that period, there's been a 21.1% increase. Residential has borne the burden of most of that. And then there's commercial and industrial. Now in Arizona, we've had a 16.1% increase over that time period, with residential experiencing increases of about 21%, 15% increase with commercial, and a slight reduction for industrial. Just a second here. Now, another fear that's perpetuated is that people will only look for the cheapest price if we offer choice, and this will not be renewables, but the facts do not bear that out either. Across the US, in the 14 states where regulated competition and choice is allowed, renewables are providing power at an equal or better pace than in the mandated monopoly states. Share this. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this graph. As Dan said, the resources are available online. This takes quite a bit of time to get through, but the importance is the green line here. What it is over the time period of 97 to 2019, you have 5 different types of energy. The green line on the bottom shows the addition of renewables in both competitive and monopoly states, and you see that competitive states have held their own. The black line is the reduction in coal, and you can see that it's much greater in competitive states, and they are decarbonizing at a greater rate. Okay, let me go back. This is such fun tech toggling here. Interestingly, also, RESA has data that shows that despite claims to the contrary, competitive companies are able to attract capital for new generation at competitive rates. And the difference is that the capital investments are not tied to a guaranteed rate of return on the backs of us, the ratepayers. You know, another purported reason not to embrace regulated competition is the sky will fall on us and we will have blackouts like what happened in February of 2021 in Texas. But we are not Texas. The Texas power grid failed because of extremely cold temperatures, their duration, and due to events completely unrelated to retail competition. The cause of most generator outages are linked to the concurrent effects of equipment failures, as well as the curtailment of natural gas fuel caused by freezing temperatures. In fact, the generator outages and subsequent blackouts affected both the monopoly and the restructured jurisdictions. The city of Austin, for example, is a monopoly and had equal, if not greater, outages than the areas of Texas with choice. Another reason that Texas grid had problems that other areas didn't experience is that, I'll show you this map. They are somewhat isolated and do not have robust interconnections with their neighbors. Now, the polar vortex came from Canada south, and here in this map of the RTOs, which are regional transmission organizations or independent system operators, the area that is colored here, this geography is all settled in the real time by a single independent operator, not individual utilities. And what happened is the Southwest Power Pool didn't experience the same consequences as ERCOT because they got power from their neighbors, the Mid-Continent ISO and the PJM RTO, because the weather was different there. That's why settling in a bigger geography has much more advantage. Now, if you look in the West, we have no organized wholesale markets run by an independent operator. There are 34 different clearing areas called banking authorities. And in Arizona, we have many. And this creates less coordination than you have in the RTOs. That means it costs more to integrate renewables, and that is why they're added more slowly. But you can see if you're settling in the hour and balancing the supply and demand in a bigger geography, the weather's going to vary such that renewables will be cheaper to add. And Arizona must accelerate its participation in an organized wholesale market in the West, because this will bolster the reliability not only of the monopoly, but of regulated competitive environments. There was a recent study, a state-led market study, showing over $176 million per year in savings to Arizona's when we join a West-wide market. And the reason we want that too is to, again, integrate more renewables cost effectively, because climate change is unquestionably one of the biggest issues facing humankind today. The science is absolutely clear. Look at the international IPCC report, a recent independent DNV Outlook report, and other peer-reviewed studies. These reports and scientists conclude that we are not on track to ensure no more than 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit temperature increase by 2050. To reach that goal, emissions worldwide would need to be reduced by 50% by 2030. I mean, imagine how many more forest fires, floods, hurricanes, asthma, and other illnesses will be caused by further global warming as our home heats up. My 3 grandchildren and yours deserve a world where they can breathe and play outside. Studies have shown that there is a causal connection between diminished cognitive ability and air pollution in your area. What if the radio newscaster came on this morning and said, "Consider not making any critical decisions today due to high particulates caused by air pollution"? While the Arizona Corporation Commission reached a compromise to pass energy rules to require regulated utilities to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2070, that is far too late. And it's over 20 years later than other states. We cannot wait for the glacial speed of monopolies to develop energy offerings to use energy more wisely and to increase renewable power and storage. It is up to us to make decisions immediately that preserve the health of future generations. I invite you to be part of this legacy. Let's come together and demand change. I've experienced that choice works best. In conclusion, the fears about regulated competition are not fact-based. The sky is not falling, but it is getting blacker, filled with smoke from fires and particulates. The monopoly model for generation no longer serves us. Customers have proven their ability and deep desire to choose their energy solutions to best fit their needs, not the monopoly's needs. The Commission has more ability to ensure customer satisfaction under the regulated competition model and the Consumer Bill of Rights than it has trying to cajole monopolies in rate cases to do something different, where it is frankly undermanned and underfunded. The utilities use our money to fight against what we want in a related model. Clean generation is built in competitive jurisdictions at an accelerated pace. Innovation abounds and reliability goals are met. Imagine what we will lose now if we do not support change immediately. Where there is a political will, there is a way. Join me in leaving a legacy of cleaner air, greater choices, and an energy smart future where we all breathe with ease and are in awe of the beautiful blue sky above. The time to act is now. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Vicki. So first of all, I just want to mention, and I should have stated at the outset, our panelists have all agreed to take questions from our Zoom audience today. If anyone has a question, please submit it via the chat function, and I'll be more than happy to pose as many as we can within available time to each of our panelists. I did want to start out, first of all, I want to point out the book that Vicki was reading, her grandchildren in the image there, was Chicken Little. Just for those who didn't pick up on it, I thought that was interesting. So Vicki, here's a question I just want to kind of throw out, something that I've heard from folks who said, well, if there's competition at the wholesale level under FERC's jurisdiction, what's the benefit of adding competition down at the retail level? Can you take a stab at that?
Well, sure. And the other panelists may as well, but choice. I mean, yes, you want wholesale competition, but you know, what individual consumers want, you cannot assume. It's quite varied. I mean, some want 100% green, some don't. Some just want to lower their bill. Some want fixed pricing. Some want a cap and collar. The choice at retail is not available at the same degree if you only have wholesale competition.
Well, I certainly agree. And, you know, it's interesting. RESA conducted a nationwide poll in 2020. We asked folks about choice and about whether they want to have choice in both jurisdictions that offer it and those that don't. About 1,000 people participated in that poll, and by a margin of about 3 to 1, they support choice. So it's, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Vicki. Folks are interested in having their choices. Well, a lot of food for thought to think about. If, as we proceed, folks have questions they'd like to direct to Vicki or to our other panelists, again, I do invite you to submit those through the chat function, and I'll do my best to try and bring them all forward. So now we've had a perspective from someone from Arizona. I'd like to turn a little bit and bring in a perspective from someone from outside Arizona. And today, I am thrilled that we have with us the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Water Companies. Now, you might wonder, why did we bring a water guy in to talk about electricity? Well, here's the secret. I have known Rob Powelson for many years, and he's always someone that we in the industry consider one of the good guys. He does believe in competition and competitive markets, and he has a fantastic resume. We have dragged him back into the world of electricity to present to you today in Arizona. Rob has experience both as a commissioner at the United States Federal Energy Regulatory Commission with wholesale power markets, and prior to that, as the chair of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, where he presided over the evolution and development of the retail electric markets. And, you know, Pennsylvania is often held up as one of the states that really got things right, that has done things in a way that can be a model for other jurisdictions. And so as we put this webinar together, we began to think about, well, who would be a great speaker to talk about Pennsylvania? And we just couldn't come up with anyone that'd be better suited than Rob Powelson. We're delighted that he agreed to join us and here with us today. And with that, Rob, I would love to ask you to present.
Dan, thank you. And it's great to join with others. Vicki, great presentation. Look, there are a lot of takeaways from this conversation, and you'll hear from others. I come at this, obviously, with a Pennsylvania lens. Pennsylvania is the 5th largest state in the union. We enjoy a very diverse mix of power. But one thing is for certain in our market is that customers have enjoyed electric and gas competition choice in our state. You know, when you think about where we've come, we've just celebrated here in Pennsylvania a 25-year anniversary for electric competition. And before we got started, you know, there was a lot of conversation in our state General Assembly back in the mid-90s as other states like Texas and New Jersey and Massachusetts and Illinois and others were looking at electric competition. Our governor at the time, Governor Tom Ridge, really worked closely with legislative leaders in a bipartisan way to bring everybody together, working with the PUC to champion this effort. And you look back over 25 years, and I was honored to be with Governor Ridge during our celebration of this milestone, to think about where Pennsylvania has come in our retail choice model. It has, as the stairway shows, there's been some ups and downs in that market, and I will share them with you here throughout my presentation. But let me echo what Vicki said. You know, monopoly regulation has not served customers well, and you've seen this tectonic shift in the way companies, not only the Googles and the Amazons and the Walmarts and the Microsofts of the world have come in to state public utility commissions from Arizona to Virginia to other parts of the country, demanding that the state PUC, when it comes to energy efficiency programs, wind and solar procurements, and demands aimed at making the energy value chain to meet their corporate needs. Well, it's happening all over the country, and it's not just those companies. We're seeing it from steel producers to small industrial customers that are demanding these changes. You lay over that corporate sustainability goals, but as a trustee at a university here in Pennsylvania, we're having the same conversation about delevering our carbon footprint. You know, I think Winston Churchill once said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And it holds true. The same can be said about competition policy in the wholesale and retail energy markets. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a devout supporter of competition policy, because I will take, at the end of the day, competitors in a market that are able to design rules that bring least cost procurement to consumers. There's the old Tyson chicken model where it was once said on 60 Minutes, in order to compete in the global market economy, you have to expand or expire. And what we found in Pennsylvania 25 years ago, in 1996, when our General Assembly signed the Pennsylvania Competition Act, that titled the Electricity Generation Customer Choice and Competition Act, when that was signed into law, Pennsylvania's electricity rates were 15% above the national average. And of course, industrial customers were the lead drivers in saying, look, we sell our goods and services in a global market economy. Why can't utilities? And, you know, back then, policymakers in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania envisioned a retail choice model that would permit customers to have direct access to competitive, not only retail choice in their generation supply, not on both electric, but also on the gas side of the ledger. And you know what's amazing? Today in Pennsylvania, with, as Vicki mentioned, with a consumer bill of rights, with proper regulation from the PUC, that we have over 111 fully bonded electric retail energy suppliers registered and approved by the PUC here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They're fully insured, and they are required by statute to file an application which is voted on and underwritten by PUC technical staff. And let me share with you that during some of the, I feel as former chairman of the Pennsylvania PUC, I was dealt some really nasty weather hands. I had to deal with Hurricane Sandy, the derecho that rolled through came through in the midsummer night that wiped out power on the eastern seaboard, to the polar vortex and the impact that it had on wholesale power markets. But let me tell you one thing that we've come to realize, that if you have the alignment of rules, that retail energy suppliers will not only adhere to those rules, but they are rigorous, and I commend RESA, rigorous in creating a peer review of the competitors in the marketplace. And I was always proud of that fact. Now, going back to Pennsylvania, you know, it was no easy task in passing the Competition Act under Governor Tom Ridge. You know, there's an old adage in Pennsylvania, you could come up with a cure for world hunger. If you don't have 126 votes in the Pennsylvania General Assembly and 26 votes in the Pennsylvania Senate, and a governor willing to put their signature to it, you can't cure world hunger. Well, think back to 1996, when we went through this exercise of looking at really restructuring our entire monopoly utility service in Pennsylvania. To think about that, most legislatures are very risk adverse, and I respect that as a regulator. But the reality was, what if Pennsylvania didn't move in this direction? What would it look like today? And what Pennsylvania did, because What works in Pennsylvania doesn't necessarily work in Ohio, doesn't necessarily work in Texas. But what I have found through groups like RESA is the collaboration and the information sharing is what makes these markets work so viably and efficiently for consumers. Now, Pennsylvania's model was very different. When we went to market, we had to look at the stranded cost of generation assets, meaning we had the old integrated resource planning model that Vicki alluded to, which was very inefficient, never focused on customer outcomes. Now in this day and age, climate outcomes. An IRP was designed to seek the approval and prudence review of a public utility commission with no focus on the consumer. And what Pennsylvania did was we put in place to protect the utilities as we move down this path, to put a competitive transition charge, which was a surcharge on all customers' bill to make utilities whole as we transition to this market. We never took an approach to make this a taking, which is illegal. We made sure that we provided a smooth transition period to competitive markets. As I mentioned earlier, today in Pennsylvania, customers pay unbundled prices for generation, transmission, and distribution services. And guess what? Pennsylvania consumers are paying 12% less for their electricity today. And let me footnote, in certain areas of Pennsylvania, namely in Western Pennsylvania, customers are paying less for power today than they did prior to electric restructuring. Think about that for a moment. Customers in certain jurisdictions of Pennsylvania are paying less for power today than they were in 1996. And since 2008, over 1.7 million Pennsylvanians are shopping for retail energy supply. It's a remarkable story, but it didn't come overnight. We had to design customer ed programs. We had developed, in fact, with the approval of our legislature, we approved $5 million of investment on a PA Power Choice website to make it easy for customers to shop. And these are good things because, as Vicki mentioned, there's no average consumer out there anymore. The example of cutting the cord, I don't think there's anybody on this call that has a landline phone anymore. We use these devices to buy things, and that is the same in holds true for electricity supply. Now, I always like to, as a former regulator, or sometimes referred to as a recovering regulator, share with you a lot of the lessons learned. You know, the experience as states like Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, and Texas embarked on these restructuring initiatives, there are old folklore stories about what happened and why it didn't work and why we need to retreat. And I go back to the time frame in the mid-90s, and I use the Maryland example to be intellectually honest. You know, residential consumers in Maryland, the predominant utility was Baltimore Gas and Electric. And in 2005, an awful event hit our country. It was called Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina, by way of background, had a profound impact on disrupting natural gas delivery across the entire US footprint. The Northeast Corridor was at the time predominantly sourcing natural gas into the market, which set the wholesale power market price by Gulf of Mexico gas. Remember that little footnote. And I bring that up because that interruption in gas service had a profound impact on wholesale power markets, which led to increases in power. And as a result, as rate caps had rolled off and BG&E was going to market to provide default supply for customers, they were going to procure a full contract at one of the highest price points in the market. At the time, the Maryland Commission did not have rate mitigation plans in place for those non-shopping customers that were going to stay with Baltimore Gas and Electric. So I'm sure some of you will hear this story or this folklore of how awful it was and how customers were aggrieved by this situation. But the reality was, going back to my point, when you have rules and regulations in place, mitigation plans, you can avert these kind of scenarios. And so fast forward to today, where you see natural gas that skyrocketed to over $13 per MMBTU. What happened? The development of the Marcellus Shale with 500 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, the ability to provide over the lower 48 states gas supply for over 80 years had not evolved yet. And we are now less dependent on Gulf of Mexico gas. In fact, we have created our own Henry Hub in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and the entire Northeast corridor has seen close to a 50% reduction in wholesale power prices and a direct corollary back to consumers. I'll skip down to the Texas example because an example that was mentioned, the recent weather event, but back in 2008, the Texas crucible hit. The Texas crucible was viewed on the Wall Street Journal as a major impact on the wholesale power delivery in ERCOT. And what happened at the time was the heat wave that hit the Texas market caused a spike in demand, and as a result, retail energy supply contracts rose. Well, let me reiterate that many customers in the market are not shopping for variable rate products. So anytime you hear these stories about retail energy supply contracts that have aggrieved customers, you have to trust but verify. And in many cases, customers are not shopping on variable rates. The reality, though, going forward is the Texas PUC, along with the new ERCOT leadership after the ice storm of 2020, have realized, and Vicki alluded to it, that they have to do a better job looking at interdependencies in their grid. This is a grid issue. It's not a retail energy supply issue. It is purely the ability of the grid operator to look at reliability. And so I share that with you because you're going to hear a lot of the anecdotal stories about, well, what happened in Texas could happen in our market. It can, and I can share that with you. And obviously, we'll have a conversation about that. You know, I also like to remind people, and I don't want to come at this with a totally Pennsylvania-centric view, but I think it's important that we look at where our power production in this country is going. Customers, as I said earlier, there's no average customer anymore. In fact, about 10 years ago, the utilities used to call the customer a ratepayer. Thankfully, they've changed that vernacular, and we are now viewed as consumers. Well, consumers demand change. Consumers, as I mentioned, they want to see, some people shop on price, some people look for green energy choice. And these are the markets that we have designed in Pennsylvania, where if you look at what we offer in terms of giving a customer a real time of use rate product, to participating in a statewide energy efficiency program, to leveraging an alternative energy portfolio standard, which the Pennsylvania General Assembly adopted, it's no wonder that 1.7 million customers in our Commonwealth are shopping. So as I look to Arizona, with a great deal of respect for your economy, your legislative leadership, I commend you for the work you're doing on infrastructure. But let me just give you 3 takeaways. One, you have a responsibility to obviously conduct hearings and encourage public input. And that is what made this Pennsylvania success story one of bipartisan support back in 1996 to move forward with our Competition Act. Governor Ridge was adamant that all constituents, from residential customers to industrial customers, to small business customers, to chambers of commerce, to the NFIB, to the AARP, would come together and present their views on this topic. We also would encourage you to hold a special session on energy issues and develop a record and seek input from clean energy groups and industrial users. And I like to quote Ronald Reagan in the Trust But Verify, the baseless claims you're going to hear against electric competition policy from the incumbent utilities. I have been on this rodeo for a long time. I was honored to serve as the chairman of the Pennsylvania PUC and on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. but I think it's fair to say that residents and businesses lose out when states cling to outdated government-mandated monopoly models. And we're learning that in Pennsylvania with our liquor system, which we finally have revolutionized through competition policy. So if it can be done on the electric and gas side of the ledger, it's nice to see here in Pennsylvania, we are now one of the states that have come out of the Stone Ages on our liquor delivery. And so I'm honored to be with you, but more importantly, I am here at your disposal anytime, whether it's an email or a phone call, to share with you this experience. I think it's a very powerful, let me leave you on one high profile note, that the evolution of electric competition has created in our nation will arguably and measurably represent one of the largest wealth transfers to consumers in our nation's history. And I share that with you because it's the reality. Customers have benefited tremendously by power prices, efficient generation, and the reality, to Vicki's point, is customers are demanding clean energy resources. And if you want market-based decarbonization, competition policy is the way to go. So Dan, I appreciate this opportunity and I look forward to our conversation here this afternoon.
Rob, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Next time, try not to hold back. That was, no, seriously, that was really terrific, and you've got a wealth of knowledge. We did get a question that came in through the Q&A function that I'd like to throw out to you. One of our listeners points out that we've been talking really a lot about electric competition in the context of investor-owned utilities. But there are a lot of public entities out there, municipal light departments, co-ops, even municipal aggregators. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the role that you see of public entities within a restructured electric market?
Yeah, and again, wearing my Pennsylvania hat, we have a high concentration of rural co-ops. And you know what we have found is they have access and been big advocates, because what I love about the co-ops is they have been doing consumer advocacy well before the monopoly utility. There is not a decision made at a board level from a rural co-op that doesn't put the consumer first. They've been doing that better than anybody. In fact, look at their work in energy efficiency work in the home. It's unbelievable how far ahead they were than monopoly utilities. Again, that was my Pennsylvania experience. But they also see the benefits to bringing retail choice to the customers in their service territories. Whether it's, in my case of Pennsylvania, Volvo International in Adams County, Pennsylvania, developing for them the design of a retail product with a supplier, or Dan, your former employer, Constellation Energy, coming to one of my major water utilities, essential utilities, and offering them an all green, all wind product to meet the demands of ESG goals set by Wall Street investors. So there's a massive undertow right now that is driving this, and the utility model, the monopoly model, is being caught in some areas of our country flat-footed on this. And I think it's a really good time for this conversation to take place. And look, I say it with all sincerity, what works in Pennsylvania might not particularly work in Arizona or other jurisdictions that are considering this. But I will tell you this, as a student of Jesuit education, there's an old adage called the BA principle: borrow, add, and adapt. We've been doing it since Pericles in Athens as a society. And that's what you do with competitive markets. Pat Wood came to Pennsylvania under Chairman John Quain and sat in the hearing room and asked questions about, because we were ahead of Texas in our implementation. So there was a whole host of information sharing. And my chairmanship was the same. Each one of us worked together to get the rules right to protect customers. And it's worked pretty well.
Well, that's fantastic. And your offer to help folks in Arizona and follow up is very generous.
Especially in January and February, you know, when you want to get out of the Northeast.
Hey, I got one more question in that vein that I want to ask you about. So you know, Pennsylvania is a great model. In the industry, we love that market. We think it works really well. But in looking at it, is there anything about the way that Pennsylvania did something that if you had it to do over again, if you had a clean slate, you might do differently? Because it's a clean slate really here in Arizona. And so, you know, in looking at that model, anything you would point to and say, you know, if I could do it all over again, I might do this differently.
Wow. Well, I do know what the answer is. And the answer is going to Texas, fully requiring customers do not have the utility buying default supply for customers. As my dear colleague and mentor, James Cawley, once said, D stands for default, for dumb, for not shopping and going out in the market and getting a retail contract that is going to save you money. Utilities, look, Arizona Public Service, well-run utility, reliability, delivery of wires and pole service. None of that's going to change under this model. They're just going to be moved aside on the retail energy supply, which makes up, by the way, 2/3 of the electric bill. Customers are now empowered to go out and shop. It's pretty simple. We do it, Vicki's point. I mean, we do it with cable. We do it with everything we do in our lives. We shop that way. So the reality for us in this conversation is that was my biggest regret. But one thing I want to say, utilities with the delivery of smart meters, as I learned, those smart meters need to be receptive to customers changing. And Pennsylvania learned a valuable lesson through the polar vortex when customers on variable rate products saw skyrocketing prices. By the way, they should have never been on those contracts. But the reality was the meter switching, the utility was unable under a smart meter to get customers moved off that product in 30 days. Guess what we did? We said, you know what? You're going to do that in 2 business days. And we forced an emergency order, and I'm very proud of it, where consumers today who are on variable rates, if they see that price change, they can switch out in 2 business days. So they're not caught up in a full 30-day billing cycle. And
Fantastic.
in Texas, as we know, Texas has instantaneous, by the end of the day, you're switched. So the interconnection of that meter and giving customers choice and getting the utility out of that is so important. And I learned that the hard way. I mean, it was, believe me, the battle scars of legislative hearings and the horror stories, but we fixed it really quickly. And today, you'll hear from other presenters, that 2-day business switch has been a game changer. No one's going to wait 30 days in our economy, by the way. We don't buy things on 30-day cycles, especially this product. And the utilities were not very nice to me during that period, but they all know now that, you know what, he was right. Yeah, we fought it, but he was putting my colleagues and I and the legislature and the Independent Regulatory Review Commission said, yeah, this is the right thing to do. And we did it. And I'm glad we did it. But I regret not getting the utilities out of providing default supply. People should have market choices. And it was a mistake. I still regret it.
Well, that's great advice. A couple more questions that just came in. If I can ask you.
How Vicki get off the hook so easy? I'm taking all these questions.
they needed her to set them thinking about things, and now they're sticking you with the questions. But we can invite her to participate here too. What is the recourse for a customer if they believe they've been unfairly treated by a retail supplier?
Yeah, so great question. And Vicki brings it up, Consumer Bill of Rights. So if you're aggrieved by a supplier or there was bad marketing technique, by the way, Pennsylvania, we weren't big fans of door-to-door marketing. We don't think this product should be sold door-to-door. We went very hard at seeing all the marketing and sales programs and make sure they're done right. But one thing is, if a consumer, they call the PUC, Bureau of Consumer Services, a complaint is filed. By the way, we are very proud of assessing fines and penalties for bad actors. In fact, one particular company, we revoked their license. It was mentioned by Vicki earlier. zero tolerance. The consumer is the vanguard of all this, and the sanctity of the contract and the protection of that contract, the PUC is there to backstop it and provide oversight if a customer's aggrieved. That's very important.
Yeah.
By the way, call the FCC. By the way, right now, when you have a problem with your cable provider, call the FCC and see how that all works out. Good luck with that. You have
it sounds like the voice of experience.
Oh, trust me, it's despicable. But in this world, the PUCs through the Bureau of Consumer Services have done a remarkable job, and the great information sharing. But man, I'm proud of that. It's been no customer in Pennsylvania. They're not going to be stranded on an island. Like, how do I figure this out? What do I do?
Fantastic. Rob, thank you so much. That was tremendous, really helpful. And
thank you, Dan. Great to be with everyone.
At this point, we've heard from a couple of real industry experts, some folks with great regulatory backgrounds. Now I want to take a new direction and switch over and hear from someone who's with a competitive retail electric supplier, and who's going to give us a perspective. But I got to tell you, this guy is a great friend. I've known him for many years. I can't begin to tell you how passionate he is about competition at the retail level in the electric industry. He is an absolute stalwart in mining the data, in really looking at the numbers, the data, and cutting through the talking points and the lobbying bullets and getting down to what are the numbers and what are the facts. He is a tremendous resource to our organization. His employer, Constellation Energy, has loaned him to us many a time for his expertise and his insight. And I am just thrilled to have with us today my good friend, Rich Spilky with Constellation Energy. With that, Rich, I'm going to hand it over to you and ask you to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and good afternoon, everyone. My comments will be pretty straightforward and pretty basic. We just thought we'd take a step back in my comments here to answer some of the basic questions about the foundational principles, you might say, the foundational issues that are involved when you're comparing a monopoly structure to a competitive model that allows choice and allows competition. So we're taking a couple steps backward just to, make sure we're all on the same page of understanding, exactly how a restructured market works. So let's see if I can advance this. All right, so I'll talk very briefly on history. Vicki's already covered some of that. I'll cover some of the basic building blocks of restructured power markets. We will talk about ISOs and the important role that they play, understanding that Arizona presently is not in an ISO, and we'll talk about that for a second. I'll cover how renewable portfolio standards are handled in a competitive state as opposed to a monopoly state. I'll touch on default service. You certainly heard Rob Powelson's opinion on default service, but I'll at least offer to you some of the ways default service is handled in the various states. And then I'll conclude with a discussion about how muni-ag and or CCAs are handled in the competitive states as well. All right, so way back in the day, way back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, you see this picture on the left. And Vicki talked about this, but this picture kind of, says 1,000 words. It was absolutely, crazy when the electric industry was first coming on the scene, when the light bulb was first invented in the late 1800s by Thomas Edison. The guy on the right is not Thomas Edison. The guy on the right is a guy named Sam Insel. And this person actually worked for Thomas Edison in New York City. And he had the idea to, this was the world he lived in. This was the chaos he was observing. You can see there's unbridled competition. There are no regulations. There's many sets of wires that you can choose from. And of course, that was unsafe and, unsightly and terribly inefficient. But this was the world that Sam Insel grew up in. But Sam Insel is going to be important to our story here in just a second, because Sam Insel was the guy who came up with the concept of the natural monopoly. He argued and stated that, the utility model, in particular the wires, should be and ought to be a monopoly. And like Vicki said in her remarks, a lot of that still holds true today. We certainly don't want 16 different sets of wires running up and down our streets, to choose from. So the wires monopoly, certainly does serve a purpose, but it's the generation side that we're talking about here today. So this timeline kind of shows where we've been in our country. Again, the dark blue line in the late 1800s, the early 1900s, that was the crazy period of, what we show as unregulated and competitive at the same time. Then there was a short period of time, well, maybe 20 years, but seemed short looking from today's perspective, where there was a lot of consolidation. And in those cases, we had unregulated monopoly, which was perhaps even worse. And you might remember from your history classes, it wasn't just the electric industry going through this back then. There was the steel industry, the banking industry, the oil industry. All of them created these things called trusts, which were basically unregulated monopolies. And those were, broken up by the federal government in a series of, landmark court cases. So you might remember those days. And so then we entered what we might call the golden era of the vertically integrated utility in the orange section of the timeline, which is, many decades. And that was what Sam Insel suggested. Sam Insel, again, saying that, it's a natural monopoly, it ought to be a monopoly, and in exchange for allowing me a legal monopoly, he agreed to let the states, or the state, in the case he was operating in Chicago at the time, regulate his prices or regulate his rates. And that was, the great regulatory compact that was achieved way back in those days. And almost all the states, and I think actually all the states, did adopt that type of model. Now that type of model started to break down in the 80s and 90s, and that's when some, but not all states, decided to move to a competitive model. And as Vicki called it, a regulated competitive model, which is a very good description of what we now have in the states that do allow choice and competition. So this picture shows currently in a color-coded way the 14 competitive states or competitive jurisdictions. And the reason we use jurisdictions is because Washington, D.C. is one of the places, and so technically they're not a state. But if I say 14 states, you'll know what I mean. So the 14 states in green are the states that have fully committed to allowing choice and competition. The utilities have divested nearly all of their generating assets, if not all of them. Almost all classes of customers are able to choose their retail supplier without restrictions. Stranded costs have already been recovered quite a number of years ago, and so the stockholders were made whole from the former vertically integrated model that they had previous to choice and competition. And so these are the states we talk about when we're talking about full-blown choice. The dark gray states, of which Arizona is one, we sometimes call the hybrid states. These states have, I'll say, dabbled in competition or have limited rules to allow certain customers under certain conditions to choose their retail suppliers, but predominantly they're still pretty much acting as vertically integrated and traditional monopoly states, but they do have maybe some special rules or special situations where they let some customers choose. So we'll talk about the basics now of restructured power markets and some of the building blocks. So first of all, probably one of the most important steps that a state needs to take if they choose to implement choice is they need to unbundle their rates. They need to separate the costs of the components that are competitive and the components, the cost components that are still regulated by the state or by the FERC when it comes to the transmission lines. So unbundling rates is a key step. And all the states, that we showed in green colored background a few minutes ago, have taken that step. That was one of the first steps that was taken. So that's kind of step one. The next step is when we talk about a traditional vertically integrated monopoly model, you notice on the left, it shows utility plant A and utility plant B and so on. And even if the utility doesn't own all the generation, they usually own most of it. And for the generation that was built by independent power producers, usually the utility has long-term agreements so they control the output of those facilities, even if they don't own them outright. And all of those costs go into the rate base, which Vicki talked about, and are allocated to customers based on the revenue requirement that the commission has approved. However, in a competitive model, notice on the left now it's non-utility plant A and non-utility plant B. That's the key difference here, because now the utility is still a monopoly from a wires perspective, and they still get a guaranteed rate of return on their delivery services, as we call them, the wires services to deliver the power, but they no longer own the generation and the competitive market, and investors have now built the generation resources that then compete to win the business of the customers. And so the role of the retail supplier, where we come in on the top, is basically we serve as a conduit or a connection, you might say, where we connect the customers on the one hand, on the right, and they want this type of product. Vicki talked about it. They want renewable. They want a certain complicated price, fixed price, or they want half and half, or what have you. And we connect them to the competitive wholesale market because we are active in the competitive wholesale market, procuring power on behalf of our customers based on their preferences and based on their special requirements that they required us to sign them up for. The terms are varied, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, all customers are different. So that's the role that the retail suppliers play. Basically, we connect the wholesale competitive market on the left with the customers on the right, and the utilities in the middle, again, are the delivery service provider. So looking at it strictly from a bullet point or a features point of view, the key point here, and I think Vicki did talk about this, but I want to emphasize it, is that in a traditional vertically integrated or regulated monopoly model, it is the customers themselves or the ratepayers who take on the risk of the utility investments in the generation. The IRP plan goes forward. Rob talked about that. It's approved, it's negotiated, but once it's approved and once the investments are made, the customers are really on the hook for changes in technology, change in consumer preferences. Whereas in a restructured model, it allows competition. The risk of the generation investment is no longer on the ratepayers. There is no rate change if the coal plant output is no longer desired because of its lack of renewable attributes. There are no issues with allowing, like I understand some states have allowed utilities to close coal plants early in exchange to make sure they get the guaranteed return. They have restructured the monies so that the utilities can still collect that. That wouldn't happen in a restructured market. Also on the left-hand side, the customers again are required to take service from the utility. They have tariffs. Sometimes they have choice of tariffs, but generally those choices are limited and the customers have little control. And in a competitive market, like Rob talked about, and like my colleague Kristina is going to talk about, there's a ton of products and services to choose from the retail market. The ISO, now I know that, again, Arizona has not made a commitment yet to join an RTO or an ISO, but the states that do allow choice, the 14 green states I showed a minute ago, are all in various of these ISOs that you see here on the screen. And the ISO definitely facilitates transactions because they are the ones who operate what I'll call the wholesale competitive market, which the retail competitive market draws its resources from. But I'll also say that not all the competitive states started with an ISO. Some of them did begin and implement retail choice prior to joining an ISO. I myself worked in that type of environment. And over the years, they have all now become members of ISOs, as you can see by the chart here. But in the beginning, the utilities were able to provide the functions that an ISO provides, during the transition period. So what does an ISO do? Well, they do a lot of things, but in general, at a high level, the letter I is pretty important. They're independent. They don't own the transmission lines. They don't own the generation. They're not customers themselves as far as, large load interests. So they are independent and they try to fairly, as a third party, operate the transmission line fairly for all parties. They coordinate, they control, they set up the market rules of the generation and the, how much capacity might cost in the future and how they're going to make sure there's fair competition going on at the wholesale level. And of course, they're regulated not by the state, they're regulated by FERC because oftentimes their jurisdiction crosses state lines. Moving on to renewable portfolio standards. Now, almost all the states have renewable portfolio standards, and Vicki, I think, did touch on this point. I'm going to touch on it again, which is in the competitive states, we have renewable portfolio standards too. And so retail suppliers are obliged to follow the rules and procure the proper percentage of renewables that the state defines as the proper percentage and the proper type of technology, wind, solar, offshore wind, whatever the case may be. And in the monopoly states, the utilities obviously follow the rules that their states put forward. But the difference is, and Vicki did touch on this, but again, I want to highlight it, is that in the competitive states, even though the amount of renewables are virtually identical percentage-wise, which that chart showed that she had, it's the private investors in the competitive states who have made the investment in those renewable assets, as opposed to putting them in the rate base of the monopoly utilities in the monopoly states. So that's a key difference. Now this slide is a bit busy, but let me just talk about it for a second. I call it the 14 flavors of default service. And we heard Rob talk about how he wasn't crazy about default service, but let me just say, and again, Arizona hasn't decided to restructure. They have not decided to, have, what type of default service they might want to have. But, there are different flavors of it, as I call it here on the slide. I'm not going to get into the detail, but I just want to point out along the theme of, just covering the high level stuff that, should Arizona decide to restructure and they want to look at different default service models, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can certainly look at the models that these other states have devised, or the Texas model, which has a completely different form of default service that doesn't include the utility procuring the power, as Rob mentioned in his remarks. So I'll just leave it at that and just say there's different flavors of it, different versions of it. They have advantages and disadvantages, and the Arizona policymakers can decide for themselves which of these they like best, if indeed they choose to go down this road. My final slide is about CCAs, or municipal aggregation, depending upon what state you're in, what you call it. These are the states that have CCAs and or municipal aggregations. And again, what that means, in general, is that the city itself or the county itself as a government body can go forward and procure power on behalf of its citizens. And then the citizens have the right to, be part of that program that the city is putting forward, or they can choose to decline and, choose their own product, from their retail supplier. So that's how it works in the competitive markets. Now, California has its own flavor, which is quite a bit different and doesn't necessarily coordinate really well with competitive retail choice going on at the same time. So the California model, while it's been adopted in California and they're using it quite a bit, it's not necessarily that it doesn't work super good with retail choice at the same time. But all the other models do have much better ways of operating with retail choice happening at the same time as the community choice aggregation, or muni-ag as it's sometimes called. So again, I'll just leave it at that without covering the details, because again, if Arizona does want to consider offering its cities and counties this ability, they don't have to reinvent the wheel, I guess is the point. They can look at these other models and decide for themselves, which features they like best themselves. So with that, Dan, I will conclude and see if there's any questions.
Wow, that was amazing, Rich. You managed to distill years worth of restructuring into about 10 minutes in a clear and concise way. I think that was terrific. Got a question in the chat a little bit earlier about what are the roles of the different entities within a restructured market. And frankly, I think you nailed it in your presentation very nicely. One of the questions we did get that came in was about the last topic you were just talking about, which was municipal aggregation and community choice aggregation. What's your perspective on it? I guess is you gave a good description of it. What do you thought? Does it work? Is it a good idea? Is it something Arizona should look at? Is it something you're not a big fan of? What's your take on that?
Well, I know it's a debatable issue within RESA itself, of which I'm a member, so I'll speak from my own personal experience. And I think it's a good idea if it's implemented properly. I've seen a lot of towns. I live in Illinois, for example, and Illinois was one of the states I had on that chart a few moments ago that has implemented, we call it municipal aggregation in Illinois. But I've seen towns, hundreds of them actually, in the heyday when it first started a few years ago, make the decision. It was, complicated. The cities were not used to making decisions like that. They weren't used to getting involved, but customers saved at the time lots of money. The city of Chicago even switched, which was, I think, like 800,000 residential accounts switched, and it all worked. And, they got the deal that they wanted for several years. And then at the end of several years, they returned back to utility default service because at the time, the retail supplier community wasn't able to compete with the default service anymore, but they went back to default service and they switched again. And it all worked and the system did not collapse. I think it's a success, to switch that many accounts successfully in a big city like that. I know the city of Boston just recently announced a big municipal aggregation agreement with a supplier, including lots of renewables and some other features. So yeah, I guess I personally think it's a good idea, and there's several models to choose from if Arizona wants to look at the advantages of each.
Fantastic. Well, Rich, thanks again for walking us through all of that. I think that was a tremendous overview and much appreciated. Which now brings us to our final speaker. We're going to hear from one more retail electric supplier. I'm very excited about this speaker as well. I've known Kristina. I've worked with her on the board of directors at RESA, and her company Vistra is another major player in the competitive retail and gas supply business. They do business on a national basis. They have a whole organization that is really quite impressive. And she is a leader within the RESA organization, heading up our efforts, particularly in the Mid-Atlantic region. Really excited to have with us today, Kristina Montgomery. With that, Kristina, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dan. My slides up here for everyone. All right, so thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be with you today. And my presentation is really going to be focused on the supplier's role in a competitive retail market. So Dan did some of my work for me, but Vistra is an integrated energy company. And when we say integrated, we mean that we are both a competitive power generator and we are a retail supplier as well. So on the power generation side, we have about 39,000 megawatts. That's enough to power 20 million homes. And we also have 4,000 megawatts of zero carbon generation, either online or under development right now. On our retail side, we serve about 5 million customers. That's residential, commercial, and industrial. We're active in 20 states in the District of Columbia. And you can see on the left-hand side, those are some of the brands that we're active under. So, from our view, competition really delivers 4 tangible benefits for consumers: greater choice, higher customer satisfaction, lower costs, and the more efficient adoption of green energy. And the foundation of any competitive market is really that consumers have the choice, and suppliers need to compete to win and retain customers. And that's really what our focus is here at Vistra. So when we talk about our capabilities, we're really seeking to provide to all consumers choice, convenience, and control. And we're going to dive into those in a little more detail. So a fundamental principle of the competitive market, like I said, is the ability for the customer to choose. And that's why we're really pushing ourselves to develop products and services that resonate with consumers. So that can be anything from a fixed price product, which provides certainty, to a solar and wind product that provides 100% green energy. One example of the products that we've really developed and innovated over the years is our Free Nights and Solar Days product. And this was first introduced in the market in 2012. And it was to take advantage of the smart meter infrastructure, which gave us interval data. And what this product does is we charge our customers a fixed price during the day, and then their electricity at night is free. And what this does is it really encourages customers to move their usage from the daytime hours when demand on the grid is high to nighttime hours when there's less demand. So it really benefits everybody that's using the grid infrastructure. But that product has been evolved over the years, as you can see. And what we're finding is a lot of our customers are asking for more renewable options. So what we've done is we've taken our Free Nights product and we've paired it with Solar Days. So you still have your free electricity at night, And then you have your electricity that you use during the day powered by solar farms. And we actually own some solar farms in the jurisdictions where we offer this product. So over the last decade, we've seen consumer interest in renewable products, or green plans, like we like to call them, evolve pretty significantly. And so we're really challenging ourselves to find ways to respond to what consumers want and bring products and services to the market that provide them a lot of value. I know we've talked about Pennsylvania today. I just wanted to give you an example of what a mature competitive market can look like. So Pennsylvania restructured 25 years ago. They do have a state-run shopping website where any customer can go to see the various offers that are available to them. And this is just a snapshot in time, but it really gives you an idea of the power of the competitive market. So there are 173 offers available right now that customers can choose from. And of those 173, 66 are renewable energy offers. And there are a number of flavors of renewable offers. They can be, 50% green all the way up to 100% green. Some of those 100% green offers even include 100% in-state solar and wind energy. So you can see that the market really is about choice. And you'll see this across a lot of the restructured jurisdictions. There's really a product out there for everyone. The next thing we look at and what we want to give our customers is convenience. So once the customer has selected the product, we really want to focus on engagement with them throughout their entire life cycle with us. And so our primary focus is meeting customers where they want to be met. And what that means is giving them the tools that they need to be able to interact with us in the manner that best suits their lifestyle. So if you look at the graph on the right, what you'll see is that the way consumers talk to companies that they do business with has really changed over time. It used to be if you had a question, you picked up the phone and you called the company. But now what we're seeing is we're getting fewer calls, and more customers are more inclined to either chat with us through a website, send us an email or text message, or use their mobile device to interact with us. So one of our goals is really to allow the customer to interact with us in the way that best meets their needs. And we pride ourselves in offering superior customer service, which is really another hallmark of competitive markets. Finally, we really want to give our customers control. One of the hallmarks of a competitive market is customer education and helping customers to understand their energy usage and ultimately how that connects to the bill that they pay every month. So we can do this in a number of ways, but all of these revolve around the principle that the more information we give to the customer, the better choices they can make to either find a product that suits their needs or handle their bill in a certain way that fits their lifestyle. So several things we do to give consumers control. We can send out things like high usage alerts to them. So if we see one of our customers using more energy than we would expect them to use, we can send them a little notification and just give them a heads up so they're not surprised if their bill is a little higher at the end of the month. Other things we can do is we have a mobile application available to our customers. They can go in that at any time of day, see what their usage is. They can see an estimate of what their monthly bill may be. And in jurisdictions where we handle the billing, customers can use that to pay their bill as well. So what we're trying to do is meet the needs of our customers every day, whether that's allowing them to change their bill due date to match up with payday, allow them to make split payments, or just to give them a better understanding of how they're using electricity on a daily basis. And so we're constantly evaluating how to deliver that value to our customers so they really have a personalized and seamless experience. So the final note I'll make, we really believe in the power of competitive markets, but I think there are several key features to a well-functioning and mature competitive market. The primary feature, as you've heard me say, is really the environment where the customer is in control of their choice. We also believe in accountability for retail suppliers. We think that's key to ensure a positive overall shopping experience for customers. And then finally, we support the ability for retail suppliers to develop strong, lasting relationships with their customers, because this really provides the incentive for suppliers to innovate and offer new products and services, which is also a fundamental key of having a successful competitive market. So with that, I thank you for your time today, and I'll send it back to Dan.
Kristina, thank you so much. That was really terrific. And I love the innovation stories that you tell, not only on the product itself, the idea of solar days and free nights together, but interesting to hear you talk about the innovations on the customer service side too, which is something we don't think of. When we think about innovation, we think it's all about the product, but the service too is a whole aspect of it where competition and innovation go hand in hand. I think that is really terrific. We got a question that came in through the Q&A that I want to throw out at you, and the listener asks, what are the barriers for the customer? Sifting through all these offers, 173 on the Pennsylvania website, and trying to understand restructuring, how this all works. The customers just get kind of confused or fed up and say, I'm just going to stick with the utility. Are there barriers, and what kind of things do you see that we can do about that?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, we fundamentally believe consumers are smart. We're making decisions day to day, everything from cell phone plans to cable plans, where to buy gas, what type of groceries to purchase. So, we know consumers can handle it, and we've seen that in the competitive jurisdictions. But you're right, 173 plans is a lot. I think what has been successful in these jurisdictions is that the commissions have set up a website that can be an unbiased source of information. So it serves two purposes. It educates the consumer, and it also says, here are some offers that are available. And if you click through a website like Pennsylvania, Maryland, the District of Columbia, what you'll see is they help the customer to pick out the features that are most important. So if you want 100% green product, click 100% green, and that will narrow down your offers. And so these websites are really good tools for consumers. And then at the end of the day, if it's still a lot to sort through, I know every retail supplier is willing to have that one-on-one conversation with a customer and really help them identify what's going to best suit their lifestyle.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, listen, as moderator, I've done a terrible job at getting us done by 20 minutes past 4. But we've had so many great questions come in and such great input from all of our panelists. I really think it was worthwhile to go a little bit over today. In closing, I just absolutely want to thank everyone who logged on, who participated and listened. And I especially want to thank our 4 panelists who I thought were just absolutely outstanding today. If we were all together live in the same room, this is the point in time where I would ask everyone to give them a round of applause. So let me applaud all of you. I think you did a fantastic job. I do want to remind everyone that RESA is out here as a resource. If you have further questions that you'd like to run by RESA or by our panelists, please visit our website, resausa.org. That's RESA, R-E-S-A, USA.org. We are absolutely there for you to answer questions and point folks in the right direction and help guide them through electric restructuring. And again, a big thank you to everyone. With that, we are concluded.
Thanks, Dan.